Welcome back to Doctrines 1. Again, I'm your teacher, Dr. Benjamin Olson. Today we're going to begin looking at the providence of God, one of the moral attributes of God as it relates to purpose we looked at last week. I wanted to zero in this week on providence of God because there's so much to think about and so much to discuss. So let's look at this from a biblical standpoint, trying to figure out just to what extent God has providence over the world. So let's look at the explanation and scriptural basis to begin with. God is continually involved with all created things in such a way that He, 1, keeps them existing and maintaining the properties with which He created them. 2, cooperates with created things in every action, directing their distinctive properties to cause them to act as they do. And 3, directs them to fulfill His purposes, directs them to ultimately fulfill His purposes. What I want to pause here for a second to just kind of think about is we see that Christ is referred to as the sustainer of all things. The sustaining that Christ does can be thought of on both a micro and a macro level. So in other words, that there is a consistent and constant work of God to cause things to continue to act as they do. So for instance, if the sun comes up in the morning and goes down in the evening, we can say that God directly caused that to happen. If I woke up in the morning and I was breathing in and out, that oxygen that is available to me can be seen as a direct cause, directly caused by God. Anything and everything that has being and does actions, God can be said to be doing directly those things. But also, not just on a macro, but on a microscopic level, at even the atomic level, that the very threads that hold the universe together can be seen to be held together by Christ Himself. That there is scientifically speaking, the weak and the strong forces of gravity, the electromagnetic forces, all of those forces are empowered and sustained by Christ Himself. All the energy of the universe that is sustaining the universe is caused by the life-giving and energy-giving God that created it and is sustaining it. So there's like I said, there's a microscopic but also a macroscopic level to which God's providence works. So He's sustaining all things. That's one aspect. Preservation is another aspect. God keeps all created things existing and maintaining the properties with which He created them. In other words, things don't just randomly pop into existence. Things don't randomly change from one thing to another. We can expect that if my dog is going to have puppies, if it is a Cocker Spaniel or if it is a Golden Retriever, I can expect that my Golden Retriever dog will have Golden Retriever puppies because things don't just simply randomly change or randomly pop into existence or out of existence. We see that God preserves the universe that He created so that things maintain as they are according to the laws of nature that He created from the beginning. Second here is concurrence. The term concurrence is that God cooperates with created things in every action, directing their distinctive properties to cause them to act according to their nature. So in other words, things do what they're supposed to do. Job 37, 6-13. The clouds bring forth rain. The seas, the waves crash on the shore. Things operate as they're supposed to operate. Animals operate according to their nature. We wouldn't be surprised if a lion eats a zebra or a gazelle or something. We're not shocked that the moose that I came across that's protecting its calf is angry that I'm there, right? All of those things happen according to what we call nature. Why? Because God is the God of nature, God is the creator of nature, and things operate according to their own nature. God is even in seemingly random or chance events. The roll of a dice, or the drawing of lots of Proverbs 16:13. The lot is cast in the lap, but its every decision is of the Lord. Why? Because what we actually know about, let's say, the roll of dice, that is not entirely completely random. In fact, nothing in our experience, in our human experience, is at all entirely random. It could seem to be random. It could be more random or more less possible to happen or less probable to happen than something else is more probable to happen. But there is probability. There are probabilities. For instance, the roll of a dice. Every muscle in your hand that is rolling those dice is operating the initial conditions of the dice that are in the hand, the way that those dice are rolling on the surface that's predetermined, the hardness of the surface, the hardness of the die, all of those conditions, those microscopic conditions, are leading up to a determined outcome that even natural scientists would recognize. In fact, in natural sciences, this is actually called chaos theory. Chaos theory is that it leads into things like the butterfly effect, that just small, seemingly random changes in an environment can create very big, very large consequences down the road, which means that God is in those things. Why? Because God is directing His creation to do what He wills. So everything is working according to its properties. The dice, in other words, let me put it this way: if I roll those dice, the possibility of them rolling once, I could potentially, the way that I roll, the way that I flick my hand, the initial position of them in my hand, I could, if practiced enough and knowing the surface that I'm rolling it on, I could potentially get good enough that I could roll the dice in a certain way to get the exact same results every time. Why? Because that's the way physics works. All right, and so because God is the God of physics, God is the God of all these things, even those tiny little changes, those tiny little seemingly random or chance events are not random at all to God, because He even knows the numbers of hairs on my head. I'm pretty sure He can determine the microfractional changes in the die that needs to take place in order for a certain number to pop up. It is incorrect for us to reason that if we know the natural cause of something in this world, then God did not cause it. Rather, if it rains, we should thank Him. If crops grow, we should thank Him. This is one of the areas that I slightly differ from Geisler. Geisler, in his section on on miracles, defining miracles as God actually superimposing His will on nature. I see miracles as not necessarily just that which we can't explain, but rather God operating within His own world to orchestrate those things which would bring about awe in the creation, i.e. in us. The divine primary cause. In other words, God is the primary cause of all things. In fact, you probably, if you are a parent or have known parents, have probably seen this in practice. When a child, let's say a 2 or 3 year old, one of the first questions they ever learn to ask is the word why. So why does that happen? Why does this happen? Why does this happen? And what I discovered as a parent, I've got 5 kids of my own. All of them are now well past the age of the incessant toddler asking why. Every last one of them, every time as they continue to ask why further and further down that line, the more I realize that there's really only 2 answers to that question, to the question of why. Either one, because God made it that way, because God is the primary cause of all things, or because I said so and I'm your father and I told you to. So either by fiat command or by natural order of things, either way. And by the way, why do I have the authority to do so? To say that to you? Because God made it that way. So ultimately, the only answer is because God made it that way. And we're practicing the idea of God being the primary cause. In other words, he initiates everything that happens, understanding the direct consequences of all those other things that would then ensue because of it. He understands the butterfly effect. He understands the minutia. In other words, you can almost think of and again, all analogies are going to end up falling down at some point. Forgive the pun here, but I'm talking about dominoes. If you think about God's providence as God setting up an elaborate domino board that is far scoping all over the place and running all over the place, and all the dominoes are set up, and in one initial act he creates all the dominoes, sets them all up, and then initiates that first domino. It could be that God works in that way. Other people would disagree with that, and I think there's a lot of nuance that we'd have to be very, very careful that I'm not espousing something that isn't true, because God also allows for free will. It's as if God also accounts for the fact that all of those dominoes also are making seemingly free will choices. But as each one of those dominoes makes those free will choices, God is 10 steps ahead of those dominoes, and those are already, it was already accounted for, that free will choice that person had. So God is the primary cause, but the created thing acts in ways consistent with its own properties that can therefore be called a secondary cause of everything that happens. In other words, I am the secondary cause. I do these things. Why? Because I am Ben Olson. Because this is who I am. These are the kinds of choices I make, and all of them. But again, God knows who I am. God knows the kind of choices I'm going to make, even though they are the causes that are evident by our observation. God, of course, is the sufficient or primary cause of those things. We see, in Job 12 and Psalm 22 and Acts 17, that God is directly involved in the bigger things, the macro scale of the way that nations are operating. We see it in all aspects of our life. God is fully aware of and is providential over what we eat, Matthew 6. Our every need, Philippians 4:19. God also supplies all your needs. Our lifespan, he knows the very numbers of our days. All of our actions, he is providential over our successes, over our failures. In childbearing, Psalm 127, children are a gift from the Lord. He opens the womb, he closes the womb. Our talents and our abilities that we have, that he's given to us, our very desires and our decisions are that of the Lord's. And of course, so many other things as Scripture says that. Well, what about evil then? What about evil? Is God then therefore the author of evil? And the answer is no. Scripture never blames God for evil. In fact, just the opposite. There are literally dozens of Scripture passages that specifically say that God did bring about some kind of evil, but that word usually should be translated calamity. He brought about calamity on in Genesis 50 with Jacob and his sons. What you intended for evil, God intended for good. That God brought it about as the primary cause, but was not the efficient cause, was not the thing that actually caused the thing. He created mankind who was capable of making free will choice. That was the free will choice they made, that God had fully accounted for in his providence and allowed for that thing to happen, and allowed that so that his will would be done, his providence would be taken care of. All right, so let's look at some of these verses. Romans 8:28, God brings about all things, including evil, for his glory, for his good. Nevertheless, God never does evil and is never blamed for evil and should not be blamed for evil. God rightfully blames and judges moral creatures for the evil that they do, the choices that we make. We are fully free to make those choices. Evil is real. It's not an illusion. And we should never do evil, for it will always harm us and others. There are always consequences, for natural consequences, spiritual consequences, eternal consequences even, for the evil that we do, that mankind does. In spite of all the foregoing statements, we have come to the point where we confess that we do not understand how it is that God can ordain that we carry out evil deeds and yet hold us accountable for them and yet not be blamed himself. There's again a paradox, much like the Trinity, in the interplay between God's sovereign will versus our free will. If you really want to delve into that deeper, I suggest Matthew Cote's philosophy courses, where he really talks about the problem of evil and the interplay between free will, choice, and God's sovereignty. And determinism, hard determinism, soft determinism, compatibilism. We deal with this a little bit more in our video in our course Doctrines 2 as it relates to salvation. So the question then: are we free? Do we have free will? Scripture nowhere says that we are free in the sense that we can ever be outside of God's providence, or of being able to make decisions that are not caused by other things, other secondary causes, right? I'm a victim of my circumstances. As I think of all the choices that I've made, how many of those did I have absolute control over? No, I had control only over the options that I had in front of me. Many of the decisions I make are really just out of my own character, my own desires, my own personality, which of course is God-given. Nor does it say we are free in the sense of being able to be righteous on our own apart from God's enabling. I'm not capable of being meriting favor before God, so I'm not free to do that. But we are nonetheless free in the greatest sense that any creature of God could be free. We make willing choices, and those choices have real consequences. I'm going to talk about a little bit more, actually real quickly, let's finish up government here. God has a purpose in all that he does in the world, and he providentially governs or directs all things in order that they accomplish his purpose, even in the macro scale of government and God's governing of all of creation. Daniel 4:35, all the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing, and he does according to his will among the host of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth, and none can stay his hand or say to him, what have you done? God does what he wills in nature. Romans 8:28, of course, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good for those who are called according to his purpose. He is orchestrating that good end. Of course, the good end there in Romans 8 is for our being conformed to the image of his Son. All right, that's it for this video. In the next video, we're going to talk about the different distinctions concerning the will of God.